1, RFK Jr. sits for his confirmation hearing in the Senate, live here on The Will Cain Show. 2, Steve Rinella, founder of MeatEater, has a new television series out all about hunting and history, where he takes on some of the unsolved mysteries of history, from D.B. Cooper to the Lost Colony of Roanoke. And today, we sit down with Steve Rinella. 3, do you go with your wife to the grocery store? Jesse Waters has lit the internet on fire and divided us here on The Will Cain Show. It is The Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel, the Fox News Facebook page, and always on demand by subscribing on Apple or Spotify. Set a reminder on YouTube, and you can join us every Monday through Thursday live at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. Or if you're listening on terrestrial radio, as there are some 36 markets across this great United States of America, if you like The Will Cain Show and you want to listen to it in another part of your day, go over to Spotify or Apple and hit subscribe. I'm excited today to hang out with Steve Rinella. I'm excited to talk about history's mysteries and the way actually that intersects with hunting, outdoorsmanship. These are all things that I love, now all brought together in this new series, Hunting History, on the History Channel, with the founder of MeatEater, Steve Rinella. But as we join you right now here live, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is sitting in his confirmation hearing. I was just told just moments ago that it was getting fairly heated. It's been antagonistic. I would suggest not even with just Democrats, but also with Republicans. Let's take a minute now and dip in and listen to the hearing to approve Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the Secretary of HHS.
He has even, I think, and I don't know that I want to ask him to get into it, but he has listed his assets and has gone through a discussion of the responsibilities under our ethics laws and is complied with all of those requirements. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, how's your morning going?
So far, so good.
Good. You came prepared. I'm glad that you did. You, I believe, addressed to my satisfaction a question about Title X and the president's priority with respect to Planned Parenthood. Can you just affirm that you are 100% behind the
All right,
president's
let's bring it down right here,
policy
though.
on
I want to continue to monitor it. I'll ask the boys back in New York to continue to monitor this, specifically this line of questioning, potentially from North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis. It's going to be tough for RFK. As I watched this today, this back and forth with senators, it's going to be tough. Sitting over his right shoulder, his wife, Cheryl, from Curb Your Enthusiasm fame, over her right shoulder, Megyn Kelly of the Megyn Kelly Show. But just doing the math, if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. loses the same senators that were lost by Pete Hegseth, that would be Mitch McConnell, Lisa Murkowski, and Susan Collins, well, he can't lose any other Republican senators. But, for example, Thom Tillis of North Carolina is deeply tied to the pharmaceutical industry. Chuck Grassley and other senators from the Midwest deeply tied to the agricultural industry. So how are you going to find the math to get 50 Republican senators? In fact, this was an image that came out on social media during the hearings. This shows reporters already working on their stories. And you can see here the headline right when the hearing starts, meaning nothing really has taken place yet. The headline reads, RFK Jr. faces grilling on anti-vaccine comments and animal mutilation at confirmation hearing, Trump live updates. They wrote that headline before anything had really taken place. Now, I will say I'm not as outraged as everyone else because I think that's exactly what ended up happening. Not on animal mutilation. I don't remember that moment just yet, and I've been watching this morning. But on vaccines, he's definitely been answering tough questions. And those tough questions make it difficult to come up with the math. Let's take one more listen in here. I want to see where North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis is taking this with RFK.
eating the food because the dictates of the federal government have made it something that they don't want. But they say, well, it's a healthy alternative. It has processed materials in it, and it's not particularly attractive to them. So they throw it away. Trash cans full of food that these kids didn't eat. So then what do? They go eat snacks, or they go eat or they drink a sugared drink. The SNAP program, everything you've said about the SNAP program, I agree with. I think that we should be very, very strict about that, and it's going to make some people uncomfortable in the food manufacturing segment, produce healthy foods that we can put in the
Runway
SNAP
before he gets to his
program.
disagreement and his challenges to RFK. But let's get into what we've heard so far with story number one. Robert F. Kennedy's opening remarks today in front of that Senate committee sounded a bit like this.
The first thing I've done every morning for the past 20 years is to get on my knees and pray to God that he would put me in a position to end the chronic disease epidemic and to help America's children. That's why I'm so grateful to President Trump for the opportunity to sit before you today and seek your support and partnership in this endeavor. I will conclude with a promise. The members of this committee, to the president, and to all the tens of millions of parents across America, especially the moms, who have propelled this issue to center stage. Should I be so privileged as to be confirmed, we will make sure our tax dollars support healthy foods. We will scrutinize the chemical additives in our food supply. We will remove financial conflicts of interest from our agencies. We will create an honest, unbiased, gold standard science at HHS, accountable to the president, to Congress, and to the American people. We will reverse the chronic disease epidemic and put the nation back on the road to good health.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. played an integral role in the election of Donald Trump as president. One could argue that it may not have happened without RFK. He brought together a coalition that doesn't normally coexist. You know, I will tell you, I've heard even this morning, I really was hoping, this was a quote that I heard this morning, just anecdotally, I was really hoping that he would get confirmed as head of HHS. Why? I said, because everything is so messed up with our health. And not that I agree with him 100% on everything he's ever held or any position he's ever held, but you need something radical. And RFK's focus on chronic disease and medicinal remedies to everything that's ever happened to us health-wise is the type of radical shakeup that I think everyone, if not everyone, a huge percentage of people, not just on the right, but in America, are ready to embrace. But not, for example, Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat, who took RFK to task over what he called conspiracies about vaccines.
Mr. Kennedy has embraced conspiracy theories, quacks, charlatans, especially when it comes to the safety and efficacy of vaccines. He has made it his life's work to sow doubt and discourage parents from getting their kids life-saving vaccines. It has been lucrative for him and put him on the verge of immense power. This is the profile of someone who chases money and influence wherever they lead, even if that may mean the tragic deaths of children.
I don't think that's what we're looking at here. With all due respect to Senator Ron Wyden, I don't think RFK is exhibiting the behavior of someone who is chasing fame and clicks and virality wherever he goes. And for Democrats, for example, Senator Maggie Hassan of, I believe, Rhode Island, questioning him about how could you work under President Trump when he is pro-life and you're pro-choice, they're all reverting to political tribalism, predictable dividing lines, when the whole point of this entire coalition, from RFK to Tulsi Gabbard to Donald Trump, is that what brings us together is bigger than what drives us apart. Okay, well, Trump and RFK, they're not together, for example, on abortion, but Trump's the boss. And RFK has an opportunity to step in and bring radical change, the kind of change that I think many Americans want when it comes to health. He has a chance to bring radical change without demanding that his boss have 100% the same politics that he's had throughout his career. I don't think, and I'll leave it up to you, the listener, I'll leave it up to you, the viewer, that exposes Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a grifter, but someone who sees an opportunity to make real change and not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. Walter Kern. Yesterday we had Matt Taibbi here on the Will Cain Show. He does a show often with Walter Kern. Walter Kern just tweeted this out. He said, so this Senate confirmation hearing is a kind of bullying session, and it has taken on those tones, in which people who have manifestly failed to keep America healthy and overseen its steep decline harass someone who wants to try a new way. He's absolutely right. You can't sit up there on that dais with any sense of authority. We lead the world in chronic health problems. We lead the world in obesity. We lead the world in prescription drug use, almost every prescription drug, including antidepressants and ADHD drugs. We're fat, we're sick, and we use medicine to try to fix us. And the people that sit on that dais have helped overseeing that entire industry complex. And if somebody else says, hey, we might need to pay attention to eating healthy and exercise and what we put into our foods, I don't know how. And not looking for a medicinal solution to every problem, I don't know how, with a straight face. You play the hero and he plays the villain. By the way, for the record, he said he's not taking away Diet Coke and burgers. Watch.
To doing the research to understand the relationship between these different food additives and chronic disease so that Americans understand it and make sure that Americans are aware of it. I don't want to take food away from anybody. If you like a cheeseburger, a McDonald's cheeseburger, a Diet Coke, which my boss loves, and you should be able to get them. If you want to eat Hostess Twinkies, you should be able to do that. But you should know what the impacts are on your family and on your health.
And you should know, and maybe we don't subsidize them. Maybe they're not covered by SNAP. Maybe they're not incentivized with tax dollars. Maybe we're sane when it comes to health and food. So you don't have to go hoarding your Cheetos into the closet so that you can stock up over the next 4 years. The biggest mysteries in history when it comes to outdoorsmanship coinciding with hunting, things that we've talked about here, the Lost Colony of Roanoke, the Lumbies, the Melungeons. I love this stuff. Plus what happened to D.B. Cooper. Let's break down some of the biggest mysteries of history with Steve Rinella next on The Will Cain Show. Whatever happened to the Lost Colony of Roanoke? Did they intermingle with Native Americans? Did they become the tribe just recognized a week ago by Donald Trump? The Lumbies. Oh, they killed off. Did they starve? Could they not survive the winter? What happened to one of the first colonies in the United States of America? It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Hey, hit subscribe at Apple, Spotify, and YouTube and be with us every day. As you can probably hear, I'm on the DL, but I'm not on the DL. I'm on the playing field, but I'm kind of pulling off Michael Jordan's flu game. As you can kind of hear, I'm not batting 1,000 right now, but I'm fighting it. I got myself a little honey tea concoction, and we're going to see if we can make it through 5 p.m. Eastern time today with another hour to go on the Fox News channel. In that hour, I won't get to dive deep on some things that I really am fascinated by, at least not yet. That show's going to be an evolution, but I get to do it here, and I get to do it now with the founder of MeatEater, Steve Rinella. What's up, Steve?
Hey, thanks, Will. Appreciate having me on, man. And I was listening in and appreciate your comments about RFK Jr. I spent some time, I interviewed him for a few hours, and it was enlightening, man. I became, fan's not the right word, but he's someone that warrants paying attention to, man.
I think so too. And I think he's earnest. I don't think he is a crackpot or a conspiracy theorist or seeking, clicks and fame. He believes it. I don't think he's right necessarily on everything, but that doesn't matter necessarily because we've gotten so much wrong when it comes to health and food. We might as well shake it up. We do need somebody somewhat radical. That's what I think.
I don't hang out with anybody who I think is right about everything, including my wife.
That's a great point, man.
But, but I hang out with a lot of people that I just, I hang out with a lot of people that I think say a lot of things that are pretty compelling and interesting.
Yeah. I want to mind that well for just a minute. I'm not going to try to push you into politics, but I think this is actually beyond politics. And look, you are somebody who's focused on food.
I think it's about health and well-being, man, but go ahead.
Yeah, and it's somebody, you, for example, have focused on food, the process of harvesting food, how you prepare food. And I didn't hear that conversation. It doesn't surprise me at all that you sat down with RFK on your show. Yeah. But yeah, I would have to imagine, Steve, that you guys have a lot in common.
Yeah, we do. We both have been. I mean, he's been very active and heavily involved in the conservation movement and aspects of clean air and clean water. I followed his work on that over the years, and I think that he's also asking some pretty compelling questions about health and diet. And as you know, like you always go through these trends in health and diet, recommendations about food that seem to be somewhat biased and political at times, where one's diet becomes political. Um, yeah, I think he's got some refreshing perspectives, man. I think he's asking some really important questions, and I also think that look at his willingness to go on and engage with podcast hosts and people like me. He's Trump demonstrated this as well, of being willing to go into conversations that you don't know how it's going to go, and being willing to sit down with people who are going to, you don't have any expectation about what they're going to ask. You're not paranoid about being put into a tough situation. And he's willing to go in and have like real conversations and hear sides of things, and then change his mind on stuff and not feel like he needs to be embarrassed about having his mind changed on things. So I like just that
Hey,
alone. I applaud like someone being able to get out there and engage with the public and engage with people that aren't scripted and overly vetted as conversation partners. That's huge to me, man. That's
yeah.
huge. And again, that's something that Trump demonstrated that I was impressed with in the last election, is just being able to get into a room and get on a mic with someone that you haven't gone over every question.
And continues to do so, by the way, now that he's a sitting president.
Yeah.
He's doing so
Yeah.
from the Oval Office, taking wild, freewheeling Q&A sessions for an hour. Hey, Steve, I got to go up to Montana and hang out with you. We went fishing together. My two boys came with me. I didn't really look around your kitchen. I didn't dig through your fridge. Are you and your wife and your family, are you guys pretty disciplined about the food that makes its way into your house?
Yeah, we are. Maybe I overdo it, because now and then I'll come home. If I'm on a trip, I might come home and my kids will confess to me that while I was away, they had chicken. Um,
Chicken.
Now and then I will find a bag of Dino Nuggets in my freezer, and I don't like it, but and they get a kick out of pushing my buttons on it. But yeah, when we sit down at night, like we make a big point. I was raised this way. We make a big point of having family dinner where everybody sits down together, all five of us, and at night we eat wild game, man, and it really brings us together. Everything, there's a discussion point. Now we spend a lot of time gathering that stuff up ourselves. Of my three kids, I got two that are of legal hunting age in Montana. So this year they did most of our big game hunting for us, and yeah, that's what we like to eat. And we celebrate it. It's a real unifying feature of our family.
So out of 7 nights a week, how many dinners is the entree, the main course, wild game?
I mean, if we ate 7 nights in a row at our house, it's seven. I
Really?
mean, like last night we had a mule deer roast. Tonight I'm braising moose meat right now for moose tacos. Um, we had some wild hog the other night. We eat a lot of mule deer. No, we eat game every night. Like we're not gonna sit down. Like when we sit down at our house, we eat wild game. And we have enough of it, like especially now. Like now that my kids hunt, man, I could retire from hunting. Um, we could just live off their stuff now.
One last question, then we're going to move to this new series, which I truly
Yeah.
am. No gratuitous compliments, excited about. Do you think, Steve, that it's possible? I don't even know, man. As I'm watching this and I see this grilling that RFK's getting on, on Capitol Hill, I just realize, and so do you, and we all do at this point, how big the pharmaceutical industry is, how big agriculture is. I don't know. I don't know how much we should get our hopes up. I just don't know if we can get RFK.
Oh, you know what? I haven't really, I haven't read much about that, man. Like I haven't read about how they think that vote's going to go. I've been I texted them a minute ago, tell them hang in there, but I haven't read any, analysis,
But you
any
do know how
educated
powerful.
analysis about what the vote's going to fall on.
But you do know how powerful those industries are and the influence they have over all of our lives.
Absolutely. But I don't know, yeah, if he gets voted down and he gets voted down because of industry pressure, that would be pretty depressing.
Yeah, it would be. Okay, it's called the Hunting History. It's on the History Channel. Okay, and it's got, in this, Steve is going to attack several mysteries throughout history. There's two that I'm particularly interested in, but there's a couple I want to ask you about because I don't know everything about him, but I've dove deep on D.B. Cooper. I love the D.B. Cooper story. I'm not alone. For some reason, it resonates with everybody. And I have dove not as well, and I have dove a little bit into the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Not enough to profess even armchair expert. But let's start there, man. I think that story's fascinating. What happened to really the first colony here in the United States?
Yeah, so we go back to late 1500s. You have, you have a lot of the Western European countries are all, duking it out over who's going to get a foothold in North America. The Spanish are pulling a lot of gold out of South America from the Aztec Empire and elsewhere, and it puts this real competitive atmosphere. And at that time, Spain was really trying to thwart any efforts to colonize north of them. So Spain would send, armed armadas up and down the coast, trying to root out anyone who's trying to establish a toehold. So as other countries, particularly England and France, are trying to establish colonies, they're sort of doing it in open hostility with Spain. England had sent a few different exploratory vessels up and down the coast, but they had never tried to establish a permanent colony until what became the Roanoke colony. When they brought those people over, it's about 117 colonists. They bring them over, and their intention was to land them up in Chesapeake Bay. The thinking was you could get well inside Chesapeake Bay and literally probably hide from the Spanish, have a chance of not being detected by the Spanish. But the people responsible for bringing them there, through a bunch of things we get into a little bit in the show, they don't. I mean, and it sounds like I'm being flippant, but they basically dump these colonists on Roanoke without a real plan put together, and it's not a place where they have a chance of really establishing a long-term colony. And they're under pressure to begin exporting, right? They're supposed to be exploiting resources and exporting agricultural products, become self-sufficient. Right away, their leader, John Smith, he goes back across the Atlantic to get more supplies and help. But a war breaks out with Spain. They don't let any vessels travel. It's 3 years till anybody comes back and checks on these, I think of them as abandoned colonists. When they do check on them, there's a hurricane brewing. They determine that they're not on Roanoke, and there's some evidence about where they might have gone. But then it's several more years later till anybody comes and looks. And so by then it's just there's effectively no trace. What surprises me is there's still people actively searching today. But that's the background.
So, in part of this, I think I've done this here on the show twice, actually, talked about the Lost Colony of Roanoke, because here's two pieces of trivia. The first white woman, European, born on this continent was part of the Lost Colony of Roanoke, Virginia Dare. As a piece of trivia, a lot of white nationalist stuff is actually named V. Dare to this day, which is kind of fascinating, that tie to that little fact of history. Second, I just got done reading this book, Steve, which I loved. It's called Demon Copperhead. It's a fiction book. But the main character in it, it's in it's in Western Virginia, and the main character is a Melungeon. I was like, what is a Melungeon? And so I fell down this rabbit hole of these unique racial subgroups in the United States. Are they Native American? Are they not? Are they freed slaves who intermarried with white people? Genetically and culturally, there are these subgroups that we don't know about. There's the Ramapo up in New Jersey, same kind of thing. And one of those groups is the Lumbee. Okay, now the Lumbee are part of your story, this Lost Colony of Roanoke. And last week, President Trump designated the Lumbee as an official Native American tribe. But there is one theory that the settlers, the colonists of Roanoke, decided we can't make it on our own, and they had friendly relationships, right, with one tribe, the Croatans, and they intermarried. and they genetically became what we know of today, at least whatever we are, 500 years later, the Lumbee, right? That's one theory of what happened to the Lost Colony.
I think that after looking at it, man, I think that every theory could be, I shouldn't say every theory. I think that many theories could be a little bit true. And I knew this part of the story going back all the way to being in, elementary school, is when they came back to check on Roanoke, prior to Smith's departure, they had come up with this little plan. If you guys move, they're supposed to, write on a tree, like literally scratch into a tree where they're headed to. And they had some symbols they were supposed to use, whether it was under duress or not. So one thing they find is there was a tree, and there was basically a fence post or a palisade corner that had been marked. One had been marked Croatoan, and one had been marked CROAT. So in partially having written it. What that would refer to is the modern day island of Hatteras, south of Roanoke, was the island that was inhabited by a group, the Croatoan. And they had some friendly relations with the Croatoan. Actually, there had been a Croatoan man who had gone all the way to England, and toured around and met royalty, right? So and they had a connection there. The question you get into is for me, how many of them were there even left to go there? And let me point out an interesting thing here. Right when they got to Roanoke, within days of getting to Roanoke, one of the would-be settlers, was killed. He was out collecting blue crabs, fishing for blue crabs, was shot full of arrows. Earlier, I had mentioned that England had done various exploratory missions up and down the coast, and they had mishandled the diplomacy and had created some open hostilities with some of the many tribes in the area. So when the settlers landed at Roanoke, they were sort of dropped into conflict that they probably didn't even really understand. And so right away, one of them gets filled with arrows, and that's immediately, within days. So if you go over the next 3 years, how many more violent deaths befell this group? So that later when they said we're going to Croatoan, like how many? I can guarantee you one thing, it wasn't 117. Was it 10? Was it 5?
Right.
And there are archaeologists that are currently doing digs on Hatteras, looking for artifacts from the colonists, and they find interesting stuff, but their stuff would have made it there, whether it walked there with them or not, because it would have been of value. It would have been picked up and traded and spread around, right?
What about the genetic ties? Did you dive into that in history?
Yeah, that was a big. I never
looking at those modern day tribes. Do they have genetic markers that would suggest they go back to Western Europe?
Yeah, no, I miss getting that. It's really compelling, and I wish it was better. I wish there was a way to get into the really nuanced detail of if we had good genetic material from those actual individuals, right? Because from that day forward, England, the English had a foothold there, and the English had soldiers that were going there. So there's a lot of ways in which you could have had offspring from England, Native Americans and English. It'd be really interesting if you found a way to pull specific genetics from those people at that time, but I don't think that's possible. One of the researchers I spoke to that felt like the one thing that he thinks is plausible to find definitive proof of where those colonists went is he points to a Christian burial. If you could find a Western European, a person of English descent, buried in a Christian burial at another site, meaning that individual was buried by their fellow countrymen, because he said you could have assimilated, you could have adopted cultural norms, but probably the last thing to go would be funerary or funeral rites. So when he talks about what would really satisfy him, it would satisfy him to find a suspected Roanoke colonist buried elsewhere in a Christian fashion. But when he searches, he says, otherwise he can't think of what would be like a definitive proof. The genetic stuff's interesting, but I think you're always going to have these other bits of noise about how those genetics could have become
when
established.
Did it happen?
Yeah, when, who, right?
One more question on the Lost Colony of Roanoke. So when I fell down the rabbit hole of this, because there's a couple of theories, right? They assimilated, they starved out, they were killed by Native Americans. On the starved out front, I also ended up, chasing the rabbit hole of Jamestown and some of the failed colonies actually up there in the Chesapeake. There was so many failed opportunities, and Roanoke being one of these failures. This ties into who you are and what you know, what your expertise, Steve. Like, I guess you have this image. I have this image in my head. Like, there's wild game and the ability to farm. Really, honestly, in most, certainly Eastern America, Arizona, that's a different ball of wax, right? But like when you looked into this, like, why is it so hard to scratch out a life in Virginia? Granted, with no infrastructure whatsoever, but I would just think between game and I guess they did put down roots in some places with some bad soil. I read they couldn't really raise stuff specifically where they were, but it didn't seem like it's Virginia and North Carolina are wholly inhospitable.
No, they're not, and I wondered about that. But you have to consider that there's a couple things that are important to keep in mind here. When they brought them over, these are people traveling. Sometimes they have infants with them. Okay. They're trying to bring over families. Had you gone and found 100, 100 people ranging in age from 18 to 35, all of them agronomists, right? Professional fishermen, and assembled some sort of like expeditionary force meant to go there and find food security, perhaps, but they didn't operate in that way. And in fact, when you look at the time, what is known about the exploratory missions in that area, the colonists in that area, it seems like the bulk of their time they spent trying to buy and trade for corn from Native Americans. And that was the most suitable crop there. And keep in mind, too, that corn is a New World crop. So here you had people that since the dawn of agriculture in North America have been successfully raising corn. And that's like the suitable crop for that area. But that wasn't what they knew. Also, the Native American presence on the landscape, pick your favorite number, but it's probably somewhere in the vicinity of 15,000 years of like adaptive evolution on a landscape, and also getting a very good sense of what is a stable population and how to disperse, how to move seasonally. It just took a long time to figure out how to exploit those resources. In the same way, if someone took you and me and brought us and put us in the Sahara, we would falter, right? And then a person that's been in the Sahara for a culture that's been in the Sahara for 8,000 years would be like, I don't get it. What's the big deal? But we would be so out of our element. And so I think you kind of find that theme of taking people from London and urban environments, tradesmen, and all of a sudden you dump them in this place where they're scared and paranoid. Travel is limited because of hostilities, because you keep blowing your diplomatic opportunities. And you create paranoia and people being locked up, and it just falls apart. Man, looking back on it, I would have hated to have been part of one of those groups.
It does sound
just
awful.
It seems like a lot of them seem like the original continental horror stories, dude.
All right, I want to get into DB Cooper in just a moment, but you do several episodes, and not all of these. You do the Donner Party. You do several others. Which one did you like the best? Like, I honed in on DB Cooper and the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Which mystery did you like best?
The one that surprised me most was the Donner Party, and I hate to admit it, but when we started in on kicking around ideas, I don't know why, I was for some reason reluctant to dig into the Donner Party. I can't really remember why, but I just felt there wasn't much there. But that wound up being one of my favorite things to explore, partially because I had an idea about it that was really inaccurate. If you go to most Americans, like, the Donner Party can almost be, people use it almost like a joke, right? Like the subject of cannibalism comes up, someone's gonna make a Donner Party joke. Cannibalism was certainly part of the Donner story. But earlier I mentioned with the Roanoke colonists that they had children. Well, of the 90 people that got stranded in the Sierra Nevada in the winter of 1846, of the 90 people, over half were children.
Mm.
So when you look like you have kids, I have kids. When you start to examine it, like what happened during that horrible winter, the things that happened were the result of people, of parents, of families doing everything possible, and I mean everything possible, to try to keep your children alive. We talk about the half of the Donner Party, not quite half died. More than half survived. Children had a higher survival rate than adults. So when you get into this lens, it's like, rather than it being like some American Horror Story again, or some dark cannibalism, Edgar Allan Poe type vibe, you look and it's like families and parents struggling mightily and doing, like I said, everything they could to try to save their families. And in that whole case, there's an interesting thing about it, of the cannibalism that did occur. They would even take measures to have it, to try to ensure that you didn't need to eat your own family members. But there's a dark side to this too, because they had, it seems as though, of the cannibalism, they were only eating people who had already died, except one man killed 2 Native American guides. One could argue that they were maybe on the edge of death, but they weren't dead. He killed 2 Native American guides, and what's crazy is, at that time in California, that was not illegal. So
Right.
this guy was maligned later, but he survived. The man that murdered the 2 Native American guides for food survived and never faced any kind of criminal trouble. You could have gotten in more trouble back then if you shot someone's cow than if you shot those 2 Native American guides. So that is like
Crazy.
a dark element. And there were some villains, but there were some incredible heroes involved with it. And so what changed about my mind about it was, rather than saying like, oh, what a dark and grotesque thing, it's like, what a heroic, just like a heroic battle to save families.
What is it about cannibalism that draws us? It draws me. I don't know if it's just the darkness. Like, this story draws me. I'm drawn to this, reading stories about that tribe out in the South Pacific that has no contact, and that guy went and tried to minister to him, be a missionary recently, like in the last 20 years. And then of course the plane crash in the Andes. I've seen every movie they put out about that one as well. I don't know what it is. Why are we so attracted to stories about cannibalism?
Well, I think it's like it's taboo for sure, but I think that when you get to that point in a story, it's a real surefire way that things got bad.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you're at the absolute edge. You're at the absolute edge. And so I think it's probably like shorthand. It's shorthand for things were as bad as it could get. And it's also just, because of the cultural taboo, it's horrible to think about. And when we were working on that episode, just our own private conversations with me and the guys I work with, when we were working on that episode, we kept debating it. And at the end of it,
what? Would you do it? Debating, would you do it?
Exactly. Yeah. And no one really knows. But in debating it, we all came to we all admitted in the end, they were like, we wouldn't have done, like, after looking at the whole thing, it's like, we wouldn't have done anything differently. And
I would do it.
I got a buddy that used to live in, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I would do it. They don't. What's harder for me is, like, I've seen again all those movies about the plane crash in the Andes. Of course, you don't want to do it, and you do everything possible. But you get to that moment in the movie or in the story when they do it, and it's revolting to them. They literally retch. That's actually kind of hard for me to put myself into. It's like, it's meat. At some point, it becomes meat, I would think. I don't know. Of course, I don't know. But I don't think that the taboo would keep me from doing it in order to survive.
No. And think about it this way, too. Like, put yourself in the situation of many people in the Donner group is beyond just you survive, you would definitely think about it differently if it was a matter of your children surviving. And there's an interesting detail
Right.
that comes out of that aspect of protecting your kids. There was a group called the Forlorn Hope, and it was a group that broke off from the stranded Donner Party members, and they wanted to go over Donner Pass and try to get to an establishment called Sutter, by a guy named Sutter that had this place in California down toward present day Sacramento. So they wanted to try to make a break for it, and they fashioned snowshoes, and they're going to walk out. Some of the people that struck off on this rescue group to seek help, some had kids, some didn't have kids. The people with kids lived. Like that term forlorn hope, like they had a thing they had to struggle. They had a thing they had to struggle for, and were less, it seems, less likely to succumb to just the despondency of the whole thing, because they had a thing pushing them along and motivating them. But on the subject of cannibalism, I recently spent some time interviewed for a while, a guy that lived in the bush and that lived in the Alaskan bush in the 70s and 80s, and they just lived entirely off the land. And him and his friends, they made a pact with each other that, should it come down to it, they made a pact that, like, we accept among our group that it's fair game. Should it come down to it, we all agree that we would like to be used for food. And he has this insane story where eventually one of the guys that he's kind of intertwined with does starve to death. And when he finds him, he's shocked. This guy, Randy, finds the body in a cabin, starved to death. And he's shocked to see that there's effectively nothing to eat. He said it's just skin laid over bone. And so he said all this time when he's like picturing what that would be like, and then to see a starvation victim, it just wasn't what he thought. He was just able to pick him up and just lay him out on the tundra, just lift him like a baby, and so that all played part of this conversation about like what you would do in the most dire of situations.
All right, last one. I imagine you are as well, Steve. I'm attracted to the Wild Wild West. Yesterday on the Will Cain Show on Fox News Channel, I actually got into this thing that Senator Mike Lee of Utah talked about, where the government can issue letters of marque and reprisal, which allows private citizens to essentially become what we know of as called privateers, right? And you can go like attack enemy ships, and you get a cut of the loot, and the government can write you these letters of marque, right? And there's something about that.
That's great.
Yeah, Mike Lee's saying maybe we should do this with
drug. I didn't know that was still a career choice.
It hasn't been done over 100 years, but he was making the argument maybe we should do this when it comes to the drug cartels. And you just know there's a bunch of good old boys from eastern Oklahoma and Texas that are ready to take up that challenge. But the point I'm kind of segueing into here is, I don't know. I love stories where there's still the sense of wildness to it. I think that's what it is about D.B. Cooper. He got away with it. Of course, I don't root for criminals, but the last time I think there's ever been a successful air hijack, right? He parachutes out over into the wilderness of Washington. Isn't it Washington?
Yeah.
Or is it Oregon? Yeah. Somewhere over in there. And he disappears.
Yes.
And we never know.
So leaving SeaTac headed south.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm hoping most of the audience knows the story of D.B. Cooper. If not, he was dressed in a suit, sunglasses, smoked cigarettes, was a gentleman to the flight attendants, but he took over the flight, said he had a bomb, and then made him, on a refueling stop, give him, how much money was it, Steve, he got? I don't even remember.
$200,000.
Yeah, and then he parachutes out the back over the...
They gave it to him in 20s. He bought a plane ticket in Portland. I think his plane ticket was $20-some. Just walked in, bought a plane ticket. The interesting little part of this is he presents the name. The name he uses is Dan Cooper. Right. Later, this is so crazy that we're running around like I say D.B. Cooper, you say everybody says D.B. Cooper. He buys a ticket under the name Dan Cooper, and this is it's Thanksgiving. It's Thanksgiving or Thanksgiving Eve. It's Thanksgiving. Buys a ticket under the name Dan Cooper. Later, a journalist in the initial hours of this happening a journalist overhears a conversation with an investigator. An investigator is talking to someone on the phone. The journalist swears the investigator said D.B. Cooper. But he didn't. He said Dan Cooper.
And here's the great question.
Publishes DB.
If it had
We're
been
still saying
Dan
DB
Cooper,
today.
and if it
What's
had
that?
been Dan Cooper, there wouldn't be songs written about Dan Cooper. There wouldn't be
No,
an obsession with
not
Dan
cool.
Cooper. It had to be DB Cooper.
Yeah, and it's our only unsolved skyjacking. And it's also insane. This is the thing I didn't realize getting into this, is there was like, in that era in the 70s, there was a legitimate global skyjacking problem. I mean,
Right.
it was a problem. There was copycat skyjackings. I mean, it was like, it was a thing that was going on all over. It was for political purposes, financial purposes, but he winds up being the only unsolved one. And I think that part of him becoming a folk hero is not just that he got away with it, but people view it as somewhat of a victimless crime. He was a gentleman to people he was surrounded by. The last flight attendant that he has any interaction with, he offers her some of the money. He wants to give her some of the money. She doesn't take it. She asks him if he has a grudge against the airline. He says, "I just have a grudge." Hurts no one. Sure, he stole money, but people can write that off. Like, they just assume that some insurance company somewhere took a hit for the money. And so he got away with it. He got away with it. Or not. Like, we don't really know. I went into it pretty convinced, man. Like, I went into it pretty convinced that he didn't survive the jump. I thought that explained a lot. I thought it explained a lot about why we know the serial numbers and all that money, and why the bulk of that money never turned up, because it was with him, and he burrowed into a hole, and didn't survive his jump. And so there wasn't a guy out making the money, spending the money. There wasn't a guy out traveling around. And it just helped, to me, it helped explain not solving it. But after spending time with parachuters that have done 14,000 jumps, special forces guys who are trained in parachutes, none of them has any reason to think he didn't survive that jump.
Really?
They're like, no, he's fine. No problem. And so that started to change my mind.
But he had to survive the elements of the wilderness as well, not just the jump, right?
Because
it was a really remote area.
That's where we wind up focusing some attention. So there's some people that believe that, so he takes off out of SeaTac and he wants to go to Mexico, but they inform him. The flight crew informs him, we can't make it that far. And they suggest landing, maybe, I can't remember where, maybe they suggest landing at LAX or something. He doesn't want to go there. It's too big, too busy. They make a deal they're going to land and refuel in Reno. So this is all happening in the air. So if he takes off, it's dark out when he takes off, and they're debating what direction they're going to go. So when he does jump out of that plane, I don't care what anybody argues on this one about him having an accomplice on the ground or him having like visual cues about where to jump. I don't buy any of that. When that guy jumped, I don't think he had really any sense within probably a 50-mile radius of where he was. I don't think he did. Pitch black, raining. At that altitude, it's like -7 degrees or something like that when he jumps, and he just pitches out into the night. There's big reservoirs in that FBI search zone. I mean, there's some major reservoirs. There's big rivers in that area, right? And he just pitched out. So the audacity. But then again, talking to really experienced jumpers who've done a lot of night jumping and other stuff, they're like, I don't see it being that much of a problem, which kind of stunned me. Like, I did a jump just to get a feel for it, but it was nothing like that. I jumped in the daytime strapped to a seasoned parachute guy, But yeah, he hit the ground, and he would have had to have tried to figure out where he was. He's got this parachute. He's got this duffel of money. There's no way he had someone waiting on the ground. So the fact that he didn't have interactions, and he might have had interactions, but if he had interactions, those people have kept their mouths shut.
Right.
Since the 70s. Right. And then it's
So-
yeah. I mean, it's like, it's a bottomless
You went
pit.
You went into it thinking he didn't survive. Now, there are
Yeah.
a couple of guys, and I've listened to all kinds of podcast series on this that focus on each one of these guys, that have been legitimate. Legitimate carries a lot of weight. I don't know if they've been law enforcement focused. They were at some point. Some of these guys were Green Berets.
Yep.
Some of these guys had done similar copycat style skyjackings. At the end, I mean, when I've listened to all this, Steve, I come away thinking, well, on one hand, I think it's really close. Like, it's got to be this guy, but they've never made an arrest. And I think the case is closed. They're not even trying anymore. So do you, at the end of it, do you have a guy that you think was D.B. Cooper?
I personally don't. I talk to people that are pretty. I talk to people that are pretty convinced about certain ideas, but it's not the same idea. So like when I'm hanging out with people that have devoted decades or their life to this, and you meet a couple of them, and you look and they're like a very equal credentials, and they've got equal amounts of time in it, and they're each convinced that it's a totally different person. Right? There's
Right.
there's not a sort of I wouldn't call it an academic consensus. But there's not a consensus emerging with the lead investigators in the story. I mean, they looked at thousands of people. There's a theme that came about, like someone within aviation because they had pretty good knowledge of the aircraft, someone with a background and doing crazy stuff like jumping out of planes. So they looked at a lot of Vietnam guys, someone disgruntled or someone with a grudge, looked at guys returning from Vietnam, nothing to lose, adventure seekers. But no, I mean, if we got to a point where the half dozen leading investigators, citizen sleuths on this all narrowed in on the same individual, I'd start paying attention. But right now, they don't agree.
Okay. All right.
And you've had so many people come forward and say, it was my dad,
I know. I've
Dozens.
seen that. Check out the parachute in my basement,
Yeah.
Well, I'll be watching. He's got the Donner Party. By the way, that's another rabbit hole that I've fallen down. These Great Lakes shipwrecks, which he focuses on some of those as well. The whatever happened to the Puebloan people, the Alaska Triangle. This is all part of Steve Rinella's new series, Hunting History, on the History Channel, which I think everybody should check out. It's fun to talk to you, man. Thanks for sharing this with us today. I'll make sure I'm not lying. I'll be watching. Thanks, man. I got more. I got more work to do today.
We'll be watching that nomination process, so take care.
All right, we'll pull through. All right, thank you, Steve. There he goes. Steve Rinella, the founder of MeatEater, and the host of Hunting History. Make sure you check that out. Let's take a quick break. We're going to come back. We're going to wrap this up by diving into the debate that Jesse Waters made the internet go crazy about and divided us here on the Will Cain Show. Do you grocery shop with your wife? Coming up on the Will Cain Show. I didn't dive in. I didn't care. But the internet's all mad. They're mad at Jesse Waters because he said, what kind of man grocery shops with his wife? It's the Will Cain Show, streaming live at foxnews.com, on the Fox News YouTube channel and the Fox News Facebook page. Hit subscribe at Apple or on Spotify. The boys back in New York are part of this debate because this divided us. Can I just say, when Steve Rinella jumped on the show, I was very happy that I didn't choose to wear that shirt today. I have the same shirt he was wearing. And I was really thinking about wearing it. Yeah. Instead, I wore the gray one. He's got the green poncho.
It would have been pretty funny, though.
It would have been. One of us has to change.
Okay. I didn't really pay attention. I saw the internet was mad about it. Here's what they're mad about. Play it, 2 days.
The New York Post caught her grocery shopping with Dougie Fresh.
Dougie Fresh.
What kind of husband goes grocery shopping with his wife?
All right. Everybody got mad at him. And not just those on the left. Yeah. This wasn't a partisan issue.
Was there a gender divide?
And this is you, 2 days. This is like your thing. You even wanted to name a segment here. 2 days rant or something.
Tuesday takes.
So you want to twist off on Jesse?
Look, I respect Jesse. He's great. Love him. He's the best. One of the best to do it. But he's just wrong. Best. It's crazy. One of the best. It's crazy. Look, I saw that and I was like, what are you talking about, man? And I didn't even think that anyone else would have this opinion. I was like, everyone grocery shops together when they're, husband and wife, girlfriend, boyfriend. I don't know. I just thought it was a thing.
Everyone does that?
I thought. Maybe it's where I grew up. I don't know. Everyone I know goes together. So I thought this was a ridiculous take. And I was like, Jesse, what are you talking about? And a lot of the internet agreed with me. So I felt a little valid in my thoughts.
Patrick, do you grocery shop with your wife?
Not at all.
They have
I can't think of, even when we were younger and with no kids,
They have
was
22
never a thing
kids,
we
so
did.
it's different. But
Yeah.
I think it's
Well, I do think that's part of it. I don't. I haven't. And again, like Patrick, I'm trying to think back before I had kids.
right.
When I was a newlywed in those first year or two, did we do that together? Maybe, but not every time. It wasn't presumed. It wasn't like, let's go to the grocery store together. It was like, hey, you want to go with me today? Ah, sure, why not?
Yeah,
You
not
know,
every
like that.
time. Not every time, but a lot of times. Like, especially, and I was saying in our group chat last night, my wife is a pescatarian. She doesn't eat meat, but eats fish. She has no idea what she's shopping for when she's getting meat, so I have to go, and I do the meat cooking.
You cook.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
you
I
said you
a lot.
cook.
Yeah.
Patrick, do you cook?
I can cook. I don't cook a lot.
That's a no. That's a hard no.
I'm batting
haven't done that a
1,000.
lot. I mean, I have older kids now, so they cook a lot more, and it's kind of nice.
I'm batting 1,000 pretty much on never cooking.
Really?
Like, I don't cook.
You just never learned or don't want to.
I mean, I can do something for my sons. Like, I can make a sandwich or something like that.
Nice.
You know.
No, but I
And
just
they like it. They like it when I do it because it's always like got,
it's a treat.
mayo and Cholula on it. It's good.
A little mayo ham sandwich on white bread. It's a good
With Cholula.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's Cholula?
Got to spice it up.
Hot sauce.
Did you say, what is Cholula?
Yeah, that's a new one.
Really?
He's from New York. He
God,
doesn't
you're
know
so-
about that stuff.
White bread, New York, Westchester. What do you use for hot sauce, James?
I don't know. I usually just use Chick-fil-A sauce.
Probably French.
Chick-fil-A sauce and barbecue sauce. Put that on everything.
Yeah, you got to grow up. You don't use hot sauce? Like
I'm really big on
how about
like,
this? Tabasco? It's
Not since
the
growing
most
up.
popular one.
I put it on everything.
I kind of like just stick to like 4 or 5 meals that I like. Like I go to a deli. I got 2 orders. Nothing. And just it works. You stick to it. You're good. Less decisions.
They have Cholula downstairs on the 3rd floor in the cafeteria
Okay.
at Fox.
I'll try
They're in
it.
little packets.
Put it on like
Yeah.
a pulled pork.
Anything. I love. It's not my favorite. Dan, do you use hot sauce?
on everything. I put it most things. I put hot sauce.
What's your
on.
go-to?
I do Frank's a
go-to?
lot, and then Cholula. Frank's Red Hot.
The ranking goes like this. This is what you got to have in your fridge. Tapatio is number 1. Love it.
Great.
Then Cholula. And then you have sriracha just as a curveball. Sometimes if you need a little different flavor,
Don't
you're
like
not into regular hot sauce. There are times when I'm like, you know what this calls for? Sriracha. And then, by the way, my wife, because she goes to the grocery store, buys Chili Crunch, which is like a Thai thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
You have to get it out with a spoon, and then you put that with your eggs as you're like frying an egg.
That's great.
That's really good stuff. Really good.
See, these are the reasons why I need to go to the grocery store with my wife, because I need to get all these little nuanced things that she doesn't really know about. And I love you. You're great. You cook very well. But I cook most of the time, and I need certain things that she wouldn't know about. And it's also kind of like a little date. It's like a little date time, you know, hanging out with your wife.
But it won't continue. It won't continue.
Want to make a bet?
You think for the rest of your life, you and your wife are going to the grocery store
Not
together?
every time, but for the most
It's
of the
got to
time.
be over 66%, like 2/3 or 75%,
Sure.
3/4 of the time.
I would say
you'd
yes. Yeah.
So in 10 years, what do you think it's going to be? It's going to be under 50%?
I bet 75% still in 10 years. We'll be going.
65.
We'll be going together.
65.
Bring the baby.
Do you go
know?
once a week? My wife goes to the grocery store a lot.
Yeah, once.
She's a
tw-
multiple
Oh, yeah.
once
That I
twi-
don't get.
grocery.
Once, twice a week, I'll go.
Yeah.
I love trying new things. I try new
No,
recipes. I need to
oh,
get new
goodness.
things and all that.
Anytime I go to the
I'm
whole,
not with Jesse. I'm not making fun of you, Dan, for doing it, but I am on Jesse's side where I was like, I didn't know this was a thing that people do. They go to the grocery store together.
See, that's really funny.
I didn't know that was a thing.
I was talking to my wife last night about this. I was like, I'm going to bring this up. And she goes, I bet Will doesn't go grocery shopping. And she was right.
you know, there's
Right.
there's a new trend.
Because your wife, sorry, James, Your
Sorry.
wife has me pegged as like a right-wing, toxic masculinity,
No.
traditional household.
No.
And so she's making those assumptions, and she's right.
No. It wasn't like that. It was just no. She's a huge fan of Will Cain, but she just thought that was something she could pin down on you.
I haven't gone to you, James, because what do you have to contribute to this conversation?
I have a-
Chick-fil-A sauce.
You'd be surprised. Here, I'll throw you a curveball. One, I have gone grocery shopping with girlfriends and found it really wholesome, although that's the honeymoon phase, so I imagine that gets old pretty quick. Two, there is a new trend in New York City in the very, like, the anti-dating trend app of, like, find your girlfriend in a normal setting that, like, the grocery store is apparently a good place to go.
I've met
Like,
a girl in a grocery store
Whole
before.
Foods, you go to Trader Joe's,
Sure.
and from just observation, I haven't actually gone up and talked to anyone, but it does seem like a decent
it's working
idea.
out. It's working out for you so far.
It
Better
does,
than
it
the
does
bar.
seem like a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. If I were you, James, and I were single in New York City, this is my advice. Everywhere is a great place to meet a girl. The subway, the street,
Yep.
the grocery store. It doesn't have to be at a bar.
Yeah.
My point is, if you see someone and they catch your attention,
Say hello.
you should say, "Hey,
Don't be
what's up?"
creepy though.
You know, don't be creepy, but you,
Yeah. Hey,
hey, what's up?
I'm James.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
I used to do all the time. I know.
Correct.
Yeah.
The phones have made it harder on our generation just because we don't necessarily know how to do that anymore, but you figure it out.
You're like, hey, can I Instagram you and then DM you and ask you out?
I'm sure there's a video on YouTube you can watch to kind of get the pointers.
Yeah.
Hold on. What time is it? I got to go. Plus, I'm losing my voice, and I got a new TV show today. Tinfoil, how'd you meet your wife?
We were in a church youth group together.
Oh, that's awesome.
Wow.
Church youth group. There we go.
Yeah.
Dan, how'd you meet your wife?
Bumble. I was on it 2 weeks and met her.
Impressive.
Wow.
2
Yeah.
weeks.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. College for me.
College.
On the
That's
deck of the
that's a
pool.
classic. Yeah.
Was
it
she Pepperdine? Pepperdine?
Pepperdine? Pepperdine.
Yeah, she went to Pepperdine.
Nice. All right.
Yeah. All right. We'll leave it there. I'm going to try to recuperate here in the next couple of hours. We'll see you at 4 o'clock Eastern time for the Will Cain Show. We'll also be back here right here, same time, same place. Fox News YouTube, Fox News Facebook, foxnews.com. I'll see you next time on the Will Cain Show.